The neighborhood had always been a picture of suburban peace, where manicured lawns and friendly waves were the norm. Among the many quaint touches that made this community charming were the garden gnomes sprouting like little soldiers along the stretches of vibrant green yards. One of the most proud displays belonged to Mrs. Jenkins, whose collection of colorful gnomes was the talk of the block. On an otherwise uneventful morning, however, Mrs. Jenkins stepped outside only to find several of her beloved gnomes missing, leaving behind only empty patches of earth and confusion. The news spread quickly. Neighbors peeked from their windows, whispering theories in hushed tones. Was it a prank? A deliberate act of vandalism? Or something more personal? Suspicion was the flavor of the day, and even the most light-hearted residents felt a prick of unease. The gently rolling camaraderie that defined the neighborhood began to crack as questions with no answers lingered in the AI artist. The rumor mill spun. Every glance became a potential accusation. Who could be so bold as to cross the invisible line of home sanctity by pilfering a garden gnome? The atmosphere grew tense, and the innocent charm of these yard ornaments suddenly took on an ominous significance. At the next HOA meeting, though the topic was not yet officially on the agenda, the disappearance was a hot subject, trading hands behind the scenes like a secret everyone wanted to expose. Even the younger residents got pulled into the drama, their conversations shifting from schoolyard gossip to theories about garden gnome thieves. But no one could have predicted how deep this situation would go or how many neighbors would be drawn into the ensuing conflict. The garden gnome theft was just the beginning of a precarious domino effect in this once peaceful community. Following the initial shock of Mrs. Jenkins' missing gnomes, the neighborhood was unsettled to discover that she was not the only victim. One by one, more homeowners reported their gnomes disappearing from lawns, porches, and flower beds. The web of suspicion tightened like a noose, with neighborhood alliances shifting and old grudges bubbling back to the surface. Conversations at morning jogs and school pickups grew charged. Passers-by cast quick furtive looks at lawns, measuring who still had their gnomes in place and who was now suspiciously gnome-less. The once warm and peaceful streets were now marked by whispered accusations and sideways glances. The term gnome thief made its rounds like wildfire, and nobody wanted to be labeled as one. From retirees to young families, everyone felt the sting of distrust. Old arguments about property lines, garden decorations, and noise complaints resurfaced. The gnome disappearances seemed to provide a catalyst, a spark that flared up tensions which had lain dormant. Several neighbors suspected each other, some openly so, while others spread quiet rumors behind backs. Social media groups dedicated to the neighborhood exploded with heated debates and screenshots of suspicious activity. One particular family, known for their borderline obsession with neighborhood rules enforcement, became an unofficial focal point of suspicion. Their history of calling the HOA about minor infractions gave neighbors reason to believe they might be stirring the pot. On the other hand, a few residents who had recently clashed over landscaping aesthetics found themselves in the hot seat. Homeowners started setting up cameras or lights pointed at their prized gardens, hoping to catch the culprit in the act. Posters appeared on community bulletin boards warning residents to beware and keep watch. The Gnome War, as it was unofficially dubbed by some, was no longer just about missing statues. It was about neighborhood control and reputation. In the dead of night, a group of neighbors, armed with flashlights and determination, decided to take matters into their own hands by organizing a stakeout. Hidden behind hedges and curtains, the vigilantes waited patiently for any sign of movement around the yards. Hours passed with only the sound of rustling leaves and distant traffic until suddenly, something happened that none had anticipated. The thieves, caught in the act, were not what the group had expected. Rather than a malicious vandal or a petty criminal, the culprits turned out to be a mix of pranksters and rival homeowners playing their own version of garden gnome guerrilla warfare. What started as a petty prank quickly escalated into a chaotic series of retaliations. Gnomes were moved, redecorated, and sometimes even ransomed back with cryptic notes left in their place. The innocence of garden decor was completely lost in this escalating war, becoming a battleground for territorial and personal vendettas. One homeowner's front steps bore a line of gnomes dressed in exaggerated angry faces, while another's had gnomes rigged with harmless but surprising squirting devices. What had been a simple theft turned into a full-blown series of paybacks that divided neighbors and transformed the streets into a vibrant stage of comical, yet biting, community warfare. Photos and videos flowed freely on social media, sparking online debates and further dividing opinions. Some residents cheered on the antics as harmless fun, while others viewed them as bullying and harassment. The situation escalated so quickly that the HOA board could no longer ignore the growing unrest brewing beneath the surface. The HOA board, initially reluctant to get involved in what seemed like a quaint neighborhood quarrel, soon found themselves at the center of a storm. The continual gnome escapades, pranks, and retaliations had left many residents frazzled and unwilling to tolerate the chaos any longer. An emergency board meeting was called to address the growing hostilities and find a resolution to the community's bizarre war. Inside the meeting room, emotions ran high as residents poured out grievances, accusations, and personal stories involving the garden gnomes. Rather than calming the situation, the meeting's confrontational tone laid bare the fractures running through the community. Some demanded harsh penalties against pranksters, while others accused the board of overreach. The atmosphere was thick with frustration, and voices frequently rose above polite conversation. Throughout the neighborhood, social media groups thrived on the drama, with live updates from the meetings, gifs of outrageous gnome setups, and sarcastic memes about HOA ineffectiveness. The feud spilled from front yards into public squares, and even local news outlets caught wind of the story, dubbing it the Gnome Wars. The HOA's attempts to mediate were complicated by entrenched grudges and the gnomes becoming symbols of much larger conflicts. The line between playful revenge and genuine harassment blurred, complicating any attempts to find middle ground. Some residents began to question if the community spirit could ever be restored or if the neighborhood had changed forever. Just when it seemed the garden gnome saga would never end, the truth began to surface in a most unexpected way. A carefully placed clue led to the surprising discovery of the mastermind orchestrating much of the gnome disappearances and escalating pranks. The revelation shocked the community to its core, shattering many assumptions and recasting long-held suspicions. The mastermind, someone previously overlooked by many neighbors, had been driven by a mix of personal frustrations and a desire to upend the status quo in the neighborhood. The stolen gnomes, once symbols of delight and whimsy, had been used as tools in a larger plan to disrupt the community's facade of perfection and inject a bit of chaos. In a dramatic and creative act of restitution, the gnomes were returned in one coordinated event that was equal parts apology and spectacle. Neighborhood lawns were suddenly dotted with the missing figures, accompanied by humorous notes and public acknowledgments that transformed tension into laughter. For many, the act was a moment of relief and reunion, as neighbors came together once again to appreciate their quirky yard decorations. Yet beneath the laughter lay the undeniable scars of a conflict that had revealed underlying grievances and mistrust. It was clear the Gnome War was more than a silly dispute. It was a mirror reflecting deeper issues that needed addressing if harmony was ever to return. With the Gnome War formally over, the neighborhood cautiously began to patch things up. A truce was called, not without lingering tensions and some wounds that would take longer to heal. The community reflected deeply on the chaos that had unfolded and the fine line between harmless pranks and serious disputes that can damage relationships. The events taught residents the importance of communication, transparency, and respect in maintaining a healthy community. The HOA vowed to improve conflict resolution processes, emphasizing dialogue over punishment. Many neighbors found new appreciation for each other's quirks and differences, knowing that the seemingly trivial had the power to ignite real conflict. Revenge, as it turned out, was a double-edged sword that no one truly won in the end. But it also served as a catalyst for change, pushing the neighborhood to confront issues rather than ignore them. The garden gnomes, meanwhile, reclaimed their place, not just as decorations but as symbols of the resilience and spirit of the community. The story closed on a note of cautious optimism, reminding everyone that behind the drama and disputes lie the everyday struggles of neighbors trying to coexist in the same shared space.